Steve Jobs started out Apple with a vision and a purpose and a focus, and then when he left, got kicked out, that they kind of lost their focus and they lost that vision. And when he came back in, he brought a renewed vision to that. I say that because I kind of feel like God started his people, the Israelites. He gave them some rails to run on, the commandments. He gave them the Old Testament, and they kind of went off the reservation. They went off and did their own thing, and it kind of got to the point where they were no longer what he intended them to be. And when Jesus came back, it was such that he didn't even recognize what was started as his people. And what had begun as a good thing, the commandments, and one of the commandments we're going to look at today is the Sabbath, had become something that it totally wasn't designed to be. And when Jesus then interacted with the Sabbath, he was mistaken as somebody that was breaking the Sabbath. And he said, basically, you don't understand. I was here at the beginning. I started this, and you've taken it somewhere that it should not have gone. And while we look at this story today in Mark, we're in Mark 2, we're going to apply it to ourselves, because I think even though we're not, most of us, Jewish, the nation of Israel, we have received commandments now, the new covenant, the commandments from Jesus. And we have now taken those and applied those, and we have added to that, to where we have all kinds of layers of things that we have become something that God did not intend us to be as well. And so we'll see what Jesus has to say to these Pharisees as we look predominantly at his interaction with the Sabbath and also with fasting. So we had this passage last week. I basically had 2 sermons prepared last week, and instead of preaching for an hour, I was gracious to end it at half an hour and say, I'm going to pick this back up next week. But I didn't mention, I read through, last week if you were here, I read through about the patches and the wineskins, and Deborah was saying, I was excited that you're going to explain this wineskin thing. Like, what was that all about? So I'm going to go back, and we're going to start back a little bit. So we're going to look here at 18, Mark 2, 18 through the end of the chapter to verse 28. So we're going to read 18 through 22 again, even though we read it last week, but we're going to talk about that some more. So if you would stand with me in honor of God's word. Mark 2, verses 18 to 28. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. The one who puts new wine into old wineskins, if he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you not read what David did? He was in need and was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So let's take this concept of the patches and the wine. It's basically 2 analogies that are saying the same thing. He says to them, first of all, the days of fasting for the disciples are not coming yet. They will. He says, he's not saying, no longer fast. And as we talked about last week, there was one day a year that they were to fast. Do you guys remember what day that was? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, right? The Day of Atonement. In the Day of Atonement, there was a day that they were supposed to fast before the Lord. Other than that, that was up to them, on their heart. If they wanted to fast before the Lord and pray, they could do that. But the Pharisees and the scribes they all put together this regiment, basically, and they would fast on Monday and on Thursdays. 2 times a week they would fast. And that was just the expectation. And you're going to fast Monday and you're going to fast Thursday. But they put that on top of the law. This is something that they added to something that God gave them. Is fasting good? Yes. Is it required? No. But they made it a requirement and an expectation. So they come to Jesus and say, why aren't your disciples fasting? What's going on with this? Why don't you follow our patterns, our traditions, the things that are law? What are some things that we have today in the church or like the Christian community that we have made to be, if you're a Christian, you will do this or you won't do that? Think through that. Are there things that you could think of that not specifically stated in Scripture, but there? One might be going to church on Sunday, right? There's nowhere in the Bible. It says don't forsake the assembly of believers, but I'm not telling you not to come to church on Sunday. Come to church on Sunday. But that's not a requirement. It doesn't say that you have to do this. Or you have to be here Sunday, and if we have a Wednesday night service, you have to be here Wednesday, and you have to be here Sunday night if we have Sunday night service. Now, I was growing up in Florida. I went to a little Baptist church in Florida. We went to church Sunday morning. Sunday night, we had another service. And then Wednesday night was youth, and we had a prayer time for the adults, and the youth had their service. We went 3 services a week, which made me better than you if you didn't go. So, not really, right? We have these traditions that we put together, and we start saying, this is my standard, this makes me a good Christian, doing these things, checking off. As my application last week was, quit keeping score and hit the floor. Quit keeping score of all the things that you think you're doing right that make you a good Christian, and quit keeping score for the people that aren't doing those things and judging them, because that's not your job. God is much more concerned about our hearts than he is about our outward actions. Now, he doesn't want us to sin, and I don't want you to sin. So outward actions do matter. It does matter. There are things that he says, this is sin, this is not sin, and we need to abstain from sin. But those things, these traditions and things that we add on especially, those things are man-made. They're traditions. So Jesus' reply is this. Basically, he says, when I leave, they'll fast. Okay? When I go away, they'll fast. And they probably don't understand that. What does this mean when he leaves? Like, where's he going? And I think the best understanding of that is when Jesus went to heaven. And he died. He was gone for 3 days. And Friday he was buried, Saturday, and then Sunday he rose again. He appeared to the disciples for 40 days in there, and then he rose again. And they ascended into heaven. And I think he's saying, when I ascend into heaven, then the disciples, I'll no longer be with them, then they will fast. So he doesn't undo fasting and say, no, it's bad. He just says they'll do it later. But then he throws in these 2 analogies. He says, no one sews unshrunk cloth on an old garment, because that garment, they so the Jews would take their clothes and put them in a dryer, they take them out of the washing machine, put them in the dryer, and when they're in the dryer, heat them up, and they would shrink. No, they didn't have that, right? They didn't have electricity, but they still had clothing. They would wash, and then it would dry, and over time that cloth would shrink. And if you put a patch that's not shrunken on there, eventually it will shrink. And if you have it attached, and then it shrinks, it's going to pull away at the fabric, and then it's going to ruin it. We get that. We're like, okay, we understand that. The second one about the wineskins is a little tougher to understand, because how many of you ever made wine with wineskins? Anyone? No? Okay. So what they would do with their wine, they would put them into vats. They would take wine and they would ferment them in vats. But they would only do part of the fermentation process in the vats. We, in America, when they make wine out in California, or even here, wherever they make it, they do all of the fermentation in vats. Then they bottle it, and then it's done. It's no longer fermenting. It's done. It's not going to change the fermentation process. If you want to know about that, Ron can tell you all about the fermentation process. But I'm not going to go there because I'm going to say something wrong. But what they did, they would start the fermentation process, and then they would complete it in these leather sacks, these leather wineskins. And you know what leather is, right? It's soft, it's pliable, and so it could expand as it needed to. If there were, if there were gases and things going on, and it needed to expand a little bit, it could handle that. And so these wineskins would just expand with the wine, and it would keep that new wine in there fresh. And when it was done with their process, they were going to put it into something else. If they take their wineskin around, it would work. If you put it in an old wineskin, old leather, how many of you have like an old leather jacket or an old leather belt, right? It's all wallet, it's all crimped, so that leather is no longer pliable, it's hard, it's brittle. And you put that new wine in a brittle wine, and it needs to expand, it's going to break through that wine in the process. And he's just saying, well, what is he saying? What is your point, Jesus? His point is this. The new wine is his teaching. The new wine is Jesus' teaching, the gospel, and his unadulterated, pure teaching of Scripture, which is now in contrast to the old wineskins, which are the traditions of man. So Jesus says, my new teaching doesn't fit in your old wineskins because it's old, they're old, and they're crumbling. And it's not that Jesus' new teaching is any different than the teaching that was from the Old Testament. I want to make that point very clear. It's not that Jesus came in and he has something different. He's saying, this is completely different. This is why it's not working, right, with Judaism, because it's completely... No, it's new teaching. It is robust. It is full of life, and Jesus is bringing life through his words. But what were these old wineskins? It was the traditions of man that had then gone up around what God had given them. There was no conflict, no contradiction between Jesus and the Old Testament. But the traditions of man that weren't part of the Old Testament, that were brought into Judaism, he did have issues with that. And they did clash with that. And it did not work. Jesus, your disciples don't fast. We have a rule. You have to fast 2 days a week. Jesus says, that's not a rule. That's not the Father's rule. That's not from God. That's from you. You have imposed that upon the people, upon yourselves. Matthew 5:17. If you want to flip over there, keep your hand there in Mark. We'll be back to Mark. Just flip over to the left a little bit. Matthew 5:17. Jesus said this, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Jesus is not coming to abolish the law and the prophets. He may be coming to abolish the traditions of man, the misconceptions of the Pharisees, the self-righteousness of the leaders, that he can abolish, and he came to abolish, but not the Old Testament and not the prophets. A little later in Matthew, go to the right, back towards Mark. We're on our way back to Mark. Matthew 23:27. I think the new word, at least, it's probably changed from when I was listening to kids talk just, a few weeks ago about what the new word is. But roast, I was like, ooh, roast. My kids are now like, if you say something, you get somebody like, oh, roasted you, right? So this is a major roast right here. Jesus is going to roast the Pharisees. Matthew 23:22, he says this. 23:27. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanliness. And so you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." Man. Roast. They looked like they had it all together on the outside. In fact, they would call other people to account because they didn't look as good as they did, and they weren't following the rules like they were doing. And Jesus says, your heart inside is dark. You have death inside of you. There's no life in there. You look like life on the outside, but inside, you're dead. And it's dark. And you're not righteous. You have self-righteousness, but you're not righteous. You're full of hypocrisy. You say one thing, but you really, your mind and your heart is on another thing. So, what I want to remind you and affirm here is this, that Jesus' teaching was against the traditions of the Pharisees. That's why he had issue with them, and that's why they had issue with him. But not against the Old Testament and not against God's law. He never sinned. He never broke God's law, ever. Because he's Jesus. He's perfect. And we know that. We have lots of passages talk about it. Him who knew no sin became sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus had no sin. He never did sin. He was tempted like us in every way, yet without sin. Hebrews tells us. So, he did not come to abolish the law or break the law. He upheld the law. He established us because he was able to uphold the law. So let's look at this next passage, which we're kind of getting into the Sabbath now. Back to Mark 2, verse 23. So it's on the Sabbath. They're going through the grain fields, and the disciples are plucking heads of grain. All right. Let's say you have a cornfield here, right here, and people are traveling by, and they just start walking into your cornfield and just plucking some corn off the corn, and they just start eating it. You know, you're like, hey, what are you doing? It's my corn. What are you eating my corn? What's going on? I'm hungry. I'm just walking through and just getting the corner of the cornfield. What's the big deal? Well, that's my corn. Well, in Judaism, they had set up within it this principle that you were to put your crops up, but you weren't supposed to reap all of the crops. You were supposed to leave the corners and the edges for travelers, so that when travelers would walk by, there are no 7-Elevens, there are no gas stations, there are no little, restaurants, pulling in, and no. If you're traveling, that's for you. The grain is for you. This is going to be a sword drill. See if you can get to Leviticus. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Leviticus 19, verse 9. You got it. Okay. Leviticus 19:9. I'll read it. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the field right up to the edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall not strip the vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. So God had that planned out already. Like, look, you're supposed to leave the edges for people that come by. That was just a generosity, a graciousness, a thing that you would do to care for those that were traveling or that were poor. You allowed them to do that. So what the disciples were doing wasn't wrong in that sense. They were walking through somebody's grain field. Right? I don't know who owned it, and they were plucking grain heads. They're traveling. That's allowed for them. They were allowed to do that. So what was the problem? On the Sabbath. The problem is on the Sabbath. Exodus 20 says this in the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not work, your son or daughter, male servant, female servant, livestock, or sojourner within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Now that's what was given to them. Do you know what the Pharisees did with that command? They came up with 39 categories of work that you should not do on the Sabbath. Has anybody ever been to Israel here? Yeah? Have you ever been on an elevator on a Sabbath day Do Jews push the button on the elevator on Sabbath? No, they have someone who's a Gentile that they pay to push the button of an elevator to get them up to their floor on the Sabbath, because pushing the button on the elevator is in one of the 39 categories a sin to do on the Sabbath. See, Jesus is saying, you guys are missing the point here. The Sabbath was made for the man, not people made for the Sabbath. What was the argument there? Did you catch that in Exodus? What did he say? You shall work 6 days and rest one. Why? Because, what was the argument? Because the Lord made the earth in 6 days and rested. He was so tired on that seventh day, God needed a break. No, he doesn't. He's inexhaustible. His power is eternal and infinite. So why did he rest on that day? Why did he do that in creation? To give us a pattern, right? From the very beginning. You know, even before we get to Exodus 20, when the Israelites were going through the wilderness, do you remember what did they eat? Manna. Get your manna. They ate manna. And how did that manna come to them? Came for 6 days. And on the sixth day, they got double. And they were supposed to put that together and then use that on the seventh. That was even before he gave this command about the Sabbath. So we have creation. He took a day of rest as an example for us. In the wilderness, they took a day of rest, even before God gave them the Sabbath. And then in Exodus 20, they give them the day of rest. Did they have the opportunity to take a day of rest in Egypt? What were they doing? They were working like crazy. They were making bricks. They were working for the Egyptians to build all kinds of things. And so they didn't have the luxury of taking a day. And now God's saying, you now have the luxury of taking off a day to take the Sabbath. Take it. Make it holy. Just like I took a day off in creation. Just like I told you in the wilderness to work 6 days, get the manna double on the sixth day, and don't work that seventh day. Now I'm telling you, don't labor. But these Pharisees went to the extreme with this. They had rules like you could walk this far, but not one step further. After this step, then you're working to walk a certain distance. They prescribed how much you could walk. What you could do, what loads you could lift, what loads you could not lift. And then later, once they had electricity, you can't touch the button on the elevator. That's work on that day. So it got out of hand. It got out of hand. But Jesus says, why was this created? You weren't created for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was created for you. Deuteronomy 5:14 says this. The seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work in your son or daughter, male servant or female servant, your ox, your donkey, your livestock, the sojourner in your gates, male servant and female servant. You shall remember you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand. Therefore, keep the Sabbath. You shall do no work. Why? Why is it that God gave them the Sabbath? It was to refresh them. It's to refresh them. The Sabbath is for our benefit. It's to bring us refreshment. It's to bring us rest. To bring us rest. They shouldn't do any work. Why? You need to rest. Rest your animals. Rest your servants. Rest yourself. There was a munitions factory during the war in Europe, and all the munitions factories were working non-stop because it's a war. And we're at war, and we need as much ammunition as we can. They were building all kinds of things at the munitions factory. Well, this munitions factory decided to take a day off, a day of rest. Do you know what happened at that munitions factory compared to the productivity of other munitions factories? They actually exceeded the productivity of the other munitions factories because they didn't stress out the machines never giving them a break, all the time going, things would just pop and break when you don't give something a rest. Right? If you just keep continually working, heating up, doing this. The people were able to rest for a day. They were more productive after a day of rest than they were if you would just keep them going. So, we know that rest is good. The Sabbath was given to us as a gift. It's not a burden that you have to fulfill because it's for the Sabbath's sake, but the Sabbath was given to you for your good. I think God knew. He knew what we were going to be like. He knew there's going to be in America that we were going to be a caffeinated society, just get up and go, and we're going to try to do as much and build as much and acquire as much or even in ministry, do as much for the Lord and just go. Because it's in our nature. We just keep going. And he says, stop. Stop. 1 day a week. Stop. Rest. Take a rest. Now, we probably all know some people that take multiple days of rest, that maybe need to be working more. But I would say most of you are in the boat that you're working, and it's sometimes hard for you to take a rest. Because you think, well, I will, I just have to, there's that one thing I've got to do right now. But I've got to do this. And God says, if you trust me, if you trust who I am, if you trust me that I am over all this, and it doesn't depend upon your work every day of doing things, you can take a day of rest, and I still will provide for you. I will give you that extra portion of manna that you need to cover that day of rest. You think your job, your company, you need to run it 7 days a week to make it productive. No, you don't. You need a day of rest. And Jesus knew this. But was this taking a piece of grain, was that work? No, it's not work. Jesus is like, look, I wrote the law. It's not what I intended, that when you're walking around and you're hungry to take a piece of grain, that's not work. That's called survival, eating. That's not work. Now, if they would stop, take a bunch of grains and go through and really harvest and then take that grain, yeah, that's working. But Jesus says this isn't work. And this is against your traditions, but it's not against God's law. You don't get it. You don't get it. And then he says to him again, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. We are not subject to the rules and regulations and traditions and all of these things that other people come up with, or even that we come up with. You shouldn't be guided by that. You should be guided by God's word and knowing, yes, there are laws. Yes, there are things that we need not transgress. And there is sin. And we need to stay away from sin and trust that God can lead us out of that sin. But when it comes to something like this, he's saying, you guys are missing the point. That's not the point. And he's saying, I have authority over the Sabbath as well. I made the Sabbath. I have authority over it. But I'll tell you this, he did not break the Sabbath. Jesus didn't break the Sabbath. Last passage we'll look at regarding this, John 7:21. Staying in the Gospels mostly here, and the Gospels and the law. John 7:21. So they're asking him, he's saying, that's why you want to kill me. They're like, who wants to kill you? You have a demon. You're crazy. No one wants to kill you. Jesus knew they did. Verse 21, Jesus answered them, I did one work and you all marveled at it. Moses gave you circumcision. Not that it's from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses won't be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do you not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. In other words, he's saying, again, you're missing the point here. I'm healing someone on the Sabbath. That's not work. That's something I'm doing good. Other place he said, who of you who had an animal that fell in a pit would not pull that animal out on the Sabbath? That's not the point. The point is that you would have rest, that you would have a day of rest. But let me ask you, do you have a day of rest? I lately have not been taking a day of rest. When is your day of rest? When are you resting? We'll talk a little more about this next week, because next week he also talks about the Sabbath. He does a healing on the Sabbath, and we can talk about this a little more. But I think a case can be made that when the New Testament came and Jesus rose again on Sunday, the church began to celebrate what they called the Lord's Day on Sunday. And the Lord's Day became the day that they would come into worship. That's why we are here today on Sunday. There are some denominations, some churches, some groups. Seventh-day Adventists, for one, they worship on Saturday. They believe the Sabbath, they stay with the Sabbath. The Sabbath started on Friday at dark. And it went that evening, all day Saturday until Saturday at dark. So it's 24 hours from Friday night to Saturday night. Well, they took that Sabbath, that the Seventh-day Adventists take that Sabbath. They don't have 39 lists of rules, but they have a lot of lists of rules within their tradition of things that you can and cannot do on the Sabbath day, which goes, I think, a little beyond what the Scripture is. But the point is this: the Sabbath was sourced in creation. The argument that God makes in the Bible, in Exodus, is that I rested a day after I created 6 days. He gave us that example. He had the Israelites rest one day. He gave it to them as the Sabbath. Jesus affirmed the Sabbath, and he said, I didn't come to abolish it. And some people use this verse, that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, to say that Jesus did away with the Sabbath, we don't have to use it anymore. I would say no. I say as Christians, we are to observe a day of rest. And we really need to do that. It's for you. It's for your rest. It's for your nourishment. It's for your benefit. Replenish you. To give you rest, to give you peace. For your good. Not for you to say, another thing I have to follow, I've got to do this, I got to obey the Sabbath, and I got to do all these things. No. It's a blessing. You get it. You get to take a day of rest. So take it. Take a day of rest. If that's Sunday, you come here, you worship, and you spend time with your family and rest and relaxation and worshiping the Lord, that's great. But if you take every day as a day to do more work at the house, do more work on your business, take some new ground, you're going to wear yourself out. And it's for your own good that God gave you the Sabbath. So take a break, take a rest. Enjoy the Sabbath. It was made for you.